So this will be an opportunity for us to learn from each other and grow together. For those who don't know me, my name is Awinet Hener, professor and researcher at ELISA Aerospace and the director of Student Space Center. I'm also a mentor of Space for Women program in the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. Let's take a moment just to accept the other participated. So I should to accept them. Yes. Okay, so let's take a moment to introduce our guest speaker today. Ruth Pritchard Kelly is an expert on satellite regulatory policy with over 30 years of experience. She is currently the senior advisor for regulatory and space policy at OneWeb, where she advises a global team of legal and technical policy analysis. She has also worked at SES Networks and American Mobile Satellite Corporation. She has a master degree from George Washington University in Space and Telecommunication and a doctorate from the University of Milan. Ms. Ruth is on the board of the USA Telecommunications Training Institute and is a member of the advisory committee of the Security World Foundation. So, dear Ruth, what a wonderful presentation. We are really lucky to have you today with us. Thank you again for your accepting of my invitation. So
thank you.
thank you. Today we will speak about our topic today is what is the regulatory policy about satellite space traffic spectrum and how did my career develop in space sector. We will be discussing and giving you practical types that you can use in your own work, and you will also take questions throughout the webinar, so please feel free to type them into the chat box. And now let's start. So dear Ruth, thank you very, very much for being with us in this conference series, and the floor now is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Professor Awinet. I'm so pleased to receive this invitation. I hope you don't mind my speaking in English. I will try to speak slowly. And please, if you have a question, put it in the chat, and I will try to look at the chat while we are talking. Let me start by sharing my screen.
Okay.
So that we can go through some slides together. And I'll need you, Hannah, please to tell me, do you see the slide?
Yes.
And do you also still see me?
Yes. I see
Okay.
you and the slides.
This is the best possible result.
Exactly.
And you do not see the notes or the extra things, right?
No.
Okay. Good, good. My pleasure. Thank you so much. So the professor asked me to come today to talk about what is regulatory policy and why would a company or government agency need a group of people to work on regulatory policy, and how did I get a job in this area, in case you might also be interested. You might not know that you are interested. I didn't, I assure you. So when we talk about my career path, I think you'll be surprised. So just to remind everyone that fiction became fact for outer space, really, in 1957, when Russia, then the Soviet Union, launched the first man-made satellite. And immediately, the legal community struggled to come up with laws to control the use of outer space. And the most famous treaty, of course, the Outer Space Treaty, says quite clearly that outer space is to remain the shared environment for everyone. This was an important concept, and it guides all the existing laws and licenses and regulations that have come thereafter. When about 10 years later, the United States landed a human on the moon. We came up, the legal community, the regulatory community, with a moon treaty about, again, keeping the moon open for all nations and peoples. And I note the United States did not sign the moon treaty. All right, forgive me. Skip ahead 40 or 50 years, and now it isn't nations, but individuals who are rich enough to build and launch their own rockets, their own satellites. In particular, there's Elon Musk with SpaceX and Starlink, but there is also Jeff Bezos with Amazon and Blue Origin and Project Kuiper. And so the question for the legal and regulatory community is, do we have the right laws? And I think you know the answer. The answer is no. Wow, we do not have the right laws, but we are struggling always. The engineers and technology come first with something exciting, and lagging behind is the legal or regulatory community wondering about how we maintain sharing the environment for all. There are multiple kinds of sharing because of multiple kinds of interference, right? So the most, the longest, no, what's the right word? The type of interference that has been known the longest really is spectrum interference. So over 100 years, nearly 150 years of sharing the frequency waves and the ITU, and that is really was my whole job for almost 25 years. I worked with sharing the spectrum with other satellite operators. More recently, with the launch of the smaller satellites and constellations, we've become aware of the physical interference, concerns about collisions and debris, and whether the satellites will be used as weapons. And also, very unexpectedly, interference with light. The optical interference where the satellites look like new stars in the sky is a real problem for astronomers. And this light pollution is something that was a surprise to the satellite world, but I think everyone would agree that human beings appreciate the ability to look at the stars and planets as much as we appreciate the ability to communicate via satellite. So it is a conversation that is ongoing about sharing the skies. A space lawyer or a policy expert has to deal with these four main areas of regulation. Again, the spectrum allocations, remember, space is for all. All new operators are entitled to share the spectrum. They just have to create and design a system that can share with the existing plans, not necessarily the existing operational satellites, but the planned ones, the ones that have announced their intention to the ITU. So a new system entitled to share, but must coordinate with existing planned systems. The liability and insurance, again, another treaty, the Liability Convention says that any nation that puts an object in outer space is responsible for any damage it might cause to another object or a person. And so most nations require their operators to take insurance in case of an accident. The sustainability of outer space has become the largest conversation. And this is where the most activity is now. What kind of collision avoidance should be used? Should all operators use the same software, the same systems? Should a single regulator manage the traffic, announce the situational awareness to other operators? Should it be done privately or by a government agency? Huge topic. There is general agreement that it should be managed, but no further agreement. Europe has come up with some ideas. The United States has been doing things for decades. The Chinese have their own system. So how do we make sure that we share the skies and share information about where our satellites are? And finally, registration. That is when a nation puts an object in outer space, it must tell the United Nations, it must register that object with the UN and take responsibility. Say that is my object, and if something happens, I am liable. Not all nations are happy about doing that. Sometimes they want a secret object, and other nations are not happy about that. So these four areas take up a lot of my time and attention. And if you go into this industry, it will affect you as well. This graphic just quickly shows the nations that have launched the most number of satellites. The United States is greatest because of Starlink. Starlink alone in the last 3 or 4 years has launched, what, 10,000 satellites? That is an incredible number of satellites. I note so far there have been no collisions. So they've got a very good system for managing their traffic. But I think we all expect there to be some kind of event, collision, things that need to be managed so that it does not happen. But if it does happen, we're prepared. We've thought about who's responsible, how do we clean it up, that kind of thing. The ITU, so I'm thinking again about where are the agencies that regulatory affairs person spends the most time. The ITU, the oldest UN agency. In fact, the ITU predates the UN. It was the International Telegraph Union. And then when the wireless technology came along, the ITU also became the sharing agency among every nation in the world, including several jurisdictions that are not recognized as nations by other nations. They still come to the table. It is one of the most exciting meeting venues in the world to go to an ITU meeting and see political adversaries working together to share the spectrum. It is a very effective regime because if you violate the rules and say just broadcast more powerfully your signal, and there's interference with another object, you also suffer interference. Your users can't hear, can't communicate. So you can't just be big and a bully. You have to share. It's really a very satisfying regime for those of us in the legal and policy arena. The liability and registration conventions take up the financial world as well. And this is the insurance industry, the banking and lending industries are all very interested in avoiding collisions, right? I believe that it is the insurance companies that will drive better regulation for the sharing, the safe sharing and continued sustainability of outer space, because they will refuse to insure constellations and projects that they think are unsafe. And if you can't get insurance, you probably won't get a license to launch either. So I think they are really going to be drivers of updated regulations. Again, I feel like this situational awareness is where the most growth and attention has been for the policy community. Worried on the left, not only about collisions and debris. And I'd like to point out the real problem with debris is the old existing debris, right? So I think that today's operators recognize that they need to clean up after themselves. And the licenses around the world are demanding that objects deorbit after their useful life is over. And there's a new industry coming along to go up and retrieve large objects or to resupply satellites that could still be used. So this in-orbit servicing industry is really growing. But the problem are the small pieces of debris from 60 years of old equipment just breaking down, and there have been a few collisions between debris causing more debris. And so the problem is this the small tiny debris. And we hope that new engineers will be thinking about inventions to clean up the debris that is there so we can continue to use the space environment. There's a big discussion about traffic management, which is being safe, versus traffic control. That would be more like an airplane where there's a control tower at every airport, right? And that control tower tells the individual planes what altitude to choose, when to land, when to take off. The plane does not make that choice, and the plane's owner operator does not make that choice, right? It's the control tower. Right now, outer space is the opposite. The individual satellites and their owner operators make the choice, make the decision about how to avoid debris, how to avoid a collision with another object. So there's a debate in various government agencies about whether that's the right system for outer space or whether they should shift more to a control regime like airplanes. By the way, I think control is a very bad idea. Me personally, I think there are a lot of differences between outer space and airspace. Chief among them, we do not come to land in a port. We do not share airports. We don't need to time takeoff and landing. And we don't share the same route. We don't share the same altitude. And so again, we don't need to have a third party coordinate where we are and what we're doing. And finally, again, the new awareness that these thousands of new satellites are effectively thousands of new stars in the sky. And the astronomers are deeply affected by this. And there's an ongoing discussion about how to dim the satellites, how to lower their reflectivity, how to increase the power of the astronomy equipment, or have software that can effectively see beyond the satellites. So it's a real issue. It's very active. On the right, on this slide, I like to bring all students' attention to the incredibly international industry we have and how quickly a single collision will involve 15 or 20 or 50 different nations, right? So if you think about it, a European rockets, yes, we all know that's Ariane, but think of that. EU has what, 25 nations? So right there, that's 25 nations involved. The satellite was built by China for an African nation. It's launched from Vostochny in Russia, right? And perhaps there's a collision with a tiny CubeSat built by an engineer from any other nation, let's say India, in another nation. And there's debris that lands on yet another nation, killing a tourist from somewhere else, right? You can fill in multiple different nations here. It is the awareness that within seconds, basically the entire world could be involved, every region of the world, in this discussion about what should we have done better? What laws or regulations might have helped to avoid this situation? And that's what my industry does. Moving on, I hope. There we go. Okay. If you are an engineering or a science student, you know what you spend your days doing. You're building things, you're doing experiments, and you may wonder, what does a policy person do? I mean, literally, what do we do? Yes, I sit at my desk a lot. Ooh, look at that typo there. Satellite all communications. Sorry. I spend a lot of time on my computer doing research. I want to look at the laws that exist in all the other nations. I'm doing research. Maybe there isn't a law about CubeSats or about mining asteroids. I'm working with a new technology, a new industry. So I have to think, well, could I draw an analogy about mining on the ground to mining in outer space? Could I make a connection for this country about launching a tiny satellite that might be the same as putting, I don't know, a tiny vehicle in deep water, right? So I have to think about how I can encourage the nation to expand its existing laws to cover my new technology so that I feel safe when I do my project. And then advocacy is a big part. When there are no laws, you, as an advocate for your company or the new technology, you have to go to meetings. You have to go visit countries. You sit down. You have a lot of coffee, a lot of coffee and tea, and just talk. You talk in small groups. You go to conferences. You speak to students on webinars. You talk a lot and you raise issues and you talk about the problem, and then you also provide solutions. You point out they don't yet have a law, but you say, look, your neighboring country does have a law. Maybe you could use that as an example. Or perhaps the European Union has already thought about this problem, and thus the countries in South America don't have to study it for 4 years. They can look at the studies that have already been done in the CEPT and maybe adopt those studies as their own. And so this is advocacy. This is convincing a government to think the way I want them to think on behalf of my industry, my company, my technology, right? And the last thing I do, both by doing research and by being an advocate, I'm defending the use of spectrum by my company, by my industry, against other companies, other industries. A prime example is space-based wireless or satellites and terrestrial wireless or cell phones, right? They're always competing about who gets new spectrum, who has the most need for more spectrum. And since we can't invent new spectrum, all we can do is use our spectrum more efficiently. It's a constant push-pull. In the ITU, within a country's own regulator, which new technology is most deserving, will serve our people the best. So I spend a lot of time arguing on behalf of my industry, which has been satellite communications. This is an incredibly international industry. I can't tell you how much I love it. I have been to so many countries, and I hope to go to more. And one of the reasons we travel so much is that mostly these are government agencies I have to visit, and they don't have travel budget. Government employees and government agencies are meant to focus on their own country. They don't travel a lot. And so if I need Paraguay or Thailand to vote a certain way in the ITU, my company probably needs to travel to Paraguay and to Thailand to have a meeting with those bureaucrats and talk to them. So there's a lot of travel. It's a bit like being a sales team. Let me talk about me very briefly. Sometimes students worry that they are doing something wrong. Maybe they haven't taken the right classes, or they didn't get the right internship or the right job offer, and they're worried that there is one right way to become an expert in their field. And I am here to tell you that is not the case. I like to point out that my original studies were in theater. I went to university, I got a degree in acting. Um, and only because acting does not make any money, I took a job during the day, as actors do, um, with my father. And again, young people often go to work for their father or their aunt or their mother, right? Just to make a little money with whatever that company happens to be. My father happened to be a satellite engineer. If he had been a carpenter, maybe things would be very different. But he was a satellite engineer, and there was a fight between Germany and France, where the Germans had launched a new German language satellite for television, right? This is 40 years ago in the 1980s. And the French were very unhappy. The French did not want German language television broadcast over their nation. And they went to the ITU and complained and asked that the German satellite be redesigned, changed, so as not to cover France. And the ITU hired my father as an expert engineer to come and mediate this argument. And my father said, "You can't change the satellite like that. The beautiful, wonderful thing about a geostationary satellite is that one satellite covers 1/3 of the globe. All of Europe and Africa is covered by this satellite. It's a thing of beauty." On the other hand, he said, you, as a sovereign nation, France, you may forbid your people from receiving the signal. That's your right as a nation. And the French realized that that sounded very closed, and they did not like to think of themselves as a country that would forbid its people from receiving information. And that was the beginning of the policy that is known as open skies. Europe has open skies. All satellites may deliver the signal. That's fine. They don't charge a fee to the satellites that are shining over Europe. You may need a license to receive it, but there are open skies for the satellites. And my father came home talking about this, and he was very happy. And I was like, wait, hold on. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not engineering. What was that? And he said, ugh, that's policy. That's spectrum policy. And I was like, yes, wow, that is interesting. That is so much more exciting than whether you can squeeze another dB out of your communications link. I went back to school, which is fairly easy to do in the United States. I got a master's degree in space policy. And started to work at another small company. And while at that small company, I realized I really wanted to specialize in the law, in outer space law. I went back to school again. At night, I was in my 30s. I got my law degree. I was 35 years old. I also had had 2 babies by then. I'd gotten married, home for almost 10 or 15 years before getting another full-time degree, full-time job when I was almost 50 years old as a satellite policy licensing expert with the Luxembourg satellite company SES in their office in The Hague in the Netherlands. And I've been working in that field ever since. I've also worked at O3B and OneWeb. And now I'm a professor at a couple of US universities and hoping soon to be fairly retired. But it has been an exciting and very, very satisfying career. I realize you are mostly engineers, but I do like to point out that outer space companies need all kinds of people, not just engineers and scientists. People who might think they're not interested in space or technology could be surprised at how many types of jobs there are in space and technology fields. I like to point out to everyone, LinkedIn may seem boring to you, but people in their 40s and 50s use it a lot for the next job. And so recruiters and people looking to fill jobs look at LinkedIn. So if you don't have a LinkedIn page, make one. And if you do have one, make sure that every few weeks you say something or you like someone else's post, because this keeps you up to date in the algorithm. And when a company is looking for a new engineer, your name might come forward. Look for internships, work experience anywhere, because working in a real company can be quite different from learning about something in school, right? And it can be helpful to get a practical experience in the government or a private company. If this is not an upper level master's degree, do consider going on after maybe you have had some experience. Come back and get a more specific degree in anything. It doesn't really matter, whatever is most interesting to you at the time. I love this field because diversity is truly valued. People in outer space, the companies in outer space are very international. They are looking for people with different languages, different cultures, different heritage, different points of view. There's a lot of employment all around the world. Every individual nation needs experts for their government agencies, for their private industries. And finally, do be willing to move, especially if you're in your 20s and you don't yet have a partner who may have a job somewhere. Be willing to go somewhere for a year or two. It will make you more interesting to your next job and could give you a very exciting opportunity. I think I've mentioned all of this, but remember that there are jobs in international non-governmental organizations, the UN, the ITU. Each national government has some agency or ministry that is looking at spectrum and now outer space. And of course, private companies. And there are so many more than just rockets and satellites these days that are interested in working in outer space. So there are lots of opportunities out there, and you can't predict now. I remind everyone, when I started my job in 1981, there was no internet. I was hired to open the mail and put it in physical inboxes, right? There was no email. There was no internet. I couldn't have predicted what kind of work I would do. It did not exist. So be open to possibilities that you can't even imagine. I think that's it. There's my email, ruth@rpkadvisors.com. I would be excited to talk to any of you individually if you would like. Let's see, end show. And of course, happy to talk with you now. Okay. I see one question in the chat. First of all, Hannah, am I back? I've stopped sharing my screen. Okay, good. Are small satellites, CubeSats, a threat to the long-term sustainability of outer space activities? Yes and no. So I think what's important is maneuverability, right? So right now, mostly it's with propulsion. Can you move out of the way for your own safety? Debris is coming toward you, you need to move, or to protect another object. That's incredibly important. You must be able to control, to track and control any object you put in outer space. So I think that those very small CubeSats that are doing experiments but have no maneuverability are a problem. Now, this doesn't mean that they shouldn't exist, but it does mean they probably need to be close to the Kármán line. They need to be close enough that the atmosphere will grab them quickly and they will burn up. They should not be anywhere near the space station or other objects, right? I think it is important that engineers get to design and build and launch their own CubeSats. What an incredible opportunity, but they have to be in a safe area in outer space. Okay, a few days ago, I saw an astronomer doing an experiment to see if Starlink satellite was using the right spectrum. Ooh, and he showed that some of the spectrum used were protected for observation purposes. How can we force SpaceX to respect their spectrum range to avoid interference? Wow, Valentin. Well,
Very
yes.
interested question.
No, very interesting question. Very interesting question. So, the best way to force an operator to operate on the frequencies they should is if their government were to control them, right? And this is what we hope, that every national government gives a license that has conditions, and one of those should be you may only use these spectrum bands. And if you don't, we will shut you off, or we will fine you, or we will punish you somehow. We will take away your license. The problem with this particular company is they are what we call a cowboy in America. This is a company that moves fast, thinks big, does exciting new things, and does not care about rules or the regulations. And the US government has a problem because they've licensed this system, but they also use this system. The US government is using it, and so they are glad that Starlink is successful and capable and working. So they need to control Starlink, but on the other hand, they like what Starlink is doing. It is a problem for the rest of the world, Valentin, and I think it's important for the rest of the world to make public this kind of announcement. They are violating their license. They are violating the ITU paperwork. They are not operating as licensed. And so I think I'm glad that the astronomer made this announcement. I hope the United States will do the right thing. The only way you can force a company to do something is if you physically go and turn off the satellites at the operations center. I mean, how realistic is that, right? The US government is not going to do that. Although I will tell you that they probably have the right to in the license. I know most licenses demand that there is a control center on national territory where the government could theoretically go and pull out all the plugs and turn everything off. I just don't think that's going to happen. Okay, Taras, what are the possible solutions to decrease the satellite interference with astronomy instruments? Okay, so a couple of suggestions, more than a couple, have been made. First of all, the satellites themselves, the materials used, and the angling of the surfaces can be adjusted so they are less reflective. They can be darker and not twinkle like a star. And most of the satellite operators are already working on less reflective colors and materials, so they won't be as visible. However, it's still a black solid object moving across the view of your camera, right? And so the problem is, how do you see what was behind the satellite? So another solution is software that in effect extrapolates. You know what was in the sky before the satellite and after the satellite. So can you have software that just fills in that little second or two when the satellite was crossing your field of vision? So that's another concept. Another concept is to put the astronomy instruments on the satellite so that these instruments are not on Earth, but already up 200 or 300 kilometers, which is probably okay for deep space astronomy. The 200, 300, 500 kilometers won't make much difference. Maybe even it will be better if they're out there. People have talked about putting more telescopes on the moon or another planet. But it's a conversation. It is ongoing right now. Obviously, none of those will work for the naked eye. People just looking at the stars themselves. I know that when Starlink first launches, people can see the satellites as they rise up to their final orbit. And so discussions are ongoing. And I think all parties would welcome new ideas. So if you have them, feel free to publish. Okay. As you know, artificial intelligence is taking leaps and bounds. How can we use this in satellite optimization and space management? That's a great question. And one of the operators, Starlink, already is using a kind of artificial intelligence for its traffic management. But this is a problem because other operators don't have the same software. Starlink has not shared, so it must be similar to the driverless cars that Tesla is inventing, right? So those cars have artificial intelligence so they can drive without a human. The satellites also have self-driving controls. The problem is that the operator cannot predict what the AI will do until close to the time of a collision. So if you want to know 2 or 3 days early, a potential collision is happening. What should my satellite do? What will your satellite do, Starlink? Starlink can't say because their satellite won't make that decision until a few hours before the collision. So that's the real problem. Either everyone is using the same artificial intelligence as their traffic management system, or people need to be using the existing system, which is actual humans talking to actual humans and observing real time what is going on. I suspect we will move toward AI for traffic management. But then, will the Chinese and the Indians and the US and the Brazilians agree to share the same software? That would be good. But I think for political reasons, that's unlikely. So, it will come slowly. This shift is what I think. Okay, next question. Do you think that space debris is becoming an urgent problem? Ooh, imprisonment in our own planet. Wow, overreacting. Can we be somewhere in between? I think that the old debris is a problem. I do. And the problem is that it isn't, it's expensive to clean it up. And who's going to pay for that? Most of the debris is from the USSR, which does not exist politically. So will Russia take responsibility for that? And the US, the USA. There are several new suggestions about laws in the US. They're very excited about the new industry to clean things up, but they're not talking about cleaning up their old small debris. They're talking about refueling new satellites and maybe retrieving a few of the large rocket stages. But even the US isn't admitting that it has responsibility for this problem that needs to be cleaned up. So, will we be imprisoned in our own planet? I think that if a collision happens, if a debris event happens and there is a cloud of debris, I think that then the governments of the world will find a way to go up and retrieve the debris. They will clean it up because they need outer space for communications. More than anything else, we use outer space to have this connection. Well, probably not this one because it's such a good connection, and we need the low Earth orbit satellites for this kind of quality speed. But they need satellites, so they will clean it up if it happens. Then they'll be forced to clean up all that debris. I don't think we'll be imprisoned. I think that's highly unlikely. The nations that have done anti-satellite testing have at least done it at a fairly low altitude, and so the debris has all re-entered the atmosphere and burned up. That's the US, Russia, India, China. I think North Korea has tried but not yet done it. But in any event, although we are very, very unhappy that these tests have happened, in fact, none of that debris has caused a problem. So, are we overreacting? A little. But I think it's very important for the legal scholars, for the policy experts to talk right now before there has been an accident. So we've thought through, how do we take responsibility? How do we clean it up? How do we stop bad behavior from individual operators or from nations? And, it's a very exciting discussion at all times.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Wow. I can't believe it's already been 57 minutes. Guys,
Yes.
our time is over. I'm just going to put my name, my email once more in the chat box.
Thank you very much for this interesting topic. Really, if I reason for our student vacay regulation and policy are licensing and frequency coordination. So by an international organization responsible for global radio frequency management, there is the orbital debris mitigation. So we all the world agency work to ensure that satellite operator follow guidelines to minimize this creation of orbital debris. You should to remove the sensing regulations such as national security, foreign policy, and the protection of intellectual property rights. Also, the export control. So the challenge now, I think, is rapid industry grow, space traffic management, international coordination, and also there is. Other opportunity for improvement that streamlining licensing process, developing a comprehensive space traffic management system, encouraging international cooperation between countries, promoting the technological solution, and also maybe enhancing the public-private partnership. So
Yes.
This is the challenge and the improvement in regulatory policy in the space, I think.
That's all so important, and I'm so glad that you and your students are following this.
Yes, yes. A very nice evening. Thank you very much, dear expert and friend. Also, I thank you also our student for the question. We thank very much for your time and your availability for us today. Very beneficial information and very important in our career as teacher, as student. Thank you also all the public present today. I wish you all a very nice evening. Thank you for the sharing your email for us and see you very soon, dear student, in the next conference series.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.